Hey there, welcome to Shadow Archives. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you enjoy true horror and unsettling stories. When I was very young, my family lived on a street called Villa in Fresno, California. At that age, your whole world feels small, shaped by the house you live in, the friends you play with, and whatever toys you treasure. For me, the house instantly became the greatest house in the universe because the people who lived there before us had left something behind in the garage. It wasn't furniture, it wasn't junk. It was Castle Grayskull, the actual big plastic magical Castle Grayskull from the masters of the universe toys. For a kid like me, that place became a palace simply because of that one thing. But while I was living my best little kid life with He-Man adventures, my sisters weren't having the same fun. They didn't care about Castle Grayskull, and they definitely didn't love the strange things that started happening almost immediately after we moved in. My oldest sister was the first to experience it. At night, she swore she could hear something walking around in the attic, but only above her room. No one else heard anything, not even me. Her bed sat directly under part of the attic, and she claimed she could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing around. Sometimes she heard scratching too, like claws dragging along wood. She would complain about it constantly, and every night she went to bed tense, expecting the noises to start up again. My little sister heard things too sometimes, though not as often. She believed our older sister, but I didn't. I thought they were trying to scare me, or maybe they were scaring themselves. Kids imagine things at night all the time, right? But one night, wanting to prove they were exaggerating, I made a bet with my oldest sister. I told her I would sleep in her room, in her bed, and she could sleep in my room. We switched rooms that night, and I remember feeling almost smug as I crawled into her bed. I lay awake for a long time, listening, waiting, expecting nothing, and for hours, nothing happened. I felt confident I had won. Eventually, my eyes grew heavy, and I drifted off to sleep, thinking the whole thing had been a huge joke. Then sometime early in the morning, while it was still dark, I jolted awake. At first I didn't know why, then I heard it, something clunking around directly above my head. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and uneven, moving across the attic floor. But there was something else too, something that sent a cold shock through me. There was a dragging sound, like whatever was up there was pulling something behind it, or like it had long nails scraping along the wood. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. All the confidence I had last night disappeared instantly. I didn't think. I didn't analyze. I just ran. I sprinted through the hallway and into my parents' room, gasping and shaking, trying to explain what happened. I slept in their bed for the rest of the night, and after that, I never doubted my sisters again. Months passed, and although the attic noises continued for my sisters, I tried to forget about the experience. Life went back to normal. Well, normal for a house that always sounded like someone lived in the attic. Then one day, something happened that forced all of us to pay attention again. Our cat had kittens, and everyone was happy. They were tiny, fluffy, adorable, and the whole house buzzed with excitement. But one afternoon, when we came home, we heard a faint crying sound coming from somewhere near the front door. We looked around until finally we saw it. A kitten pressed against the attic vent, its little face pushed tight against the screen. It was mewing loudly, over and over, sounding terrified. That vent came from the attic. My dad grabbed a chair from the kitchen and put it in my sister's closet, because of course the attic entrance had to be inside her closet. He tried to climb in, but he was too big to squeeze through. So he looked at me. I was small enough, and that meant the job fell to me. He handed me a lighter so I could see inside, then helped steady me as I climbed onto the chair, then onto the high shelf, and finally poked my head and upper body into the attic opening. The air up there felt different, stale, warm, and heavy. The small flame from the lighter shook a little in my trembling hand, casting strange shadows. I focused on the kitten far ahead near the vent. I tried calling to it, reaching toward it, hoping it would crawl closer, but it was scared, trembling, backing away from me. I kept whispering, trying to coax it toward my hand. After several attempts, it finally crept close enough for me to grab it. As soon as I had a good grip, I turned to lower myself back down. Without thinking, I shifted my body to sit on the shelf behind me, the area that connected to the part of the attic above my sister's room. That was when I saw it. Right in front of me, almost nose to nose, was a large creature. The closest thing I can compare it to is a dog, but it wasn't a dog. It was much larger, its face wrong somehow, its eyes fixed on mine. It was kneeling, its body hunched forward, as if it had been crawling through the dark to get closer. Its fur looked coarse and matted. Its shape felt unnatural, twisted slightly, not like any normal animal I had ever seen. And the worst part, it wasn't moving, not breathing, not blinking, not making a single sound. It just stared at me, silent, frozen, watching. Every muscle in my body locked up. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. My skin went cold, and I felt this instinctive fear, a primal fear that didn't feel human. I dropped the kitten immediately. It slipped out of my hands and fell back through the attic opening, yowling as it tumbled down into the closet. In a blind panic, I pushed myself backward, lost balance, and fell out of the attic entrance. I hit the closet floor hard, scrambled to my feet, and ran. I heard something above me, a heavy crash inside the attic, loud and violent. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I sprinted straight out the front door, barefoot, shaking, crying, unable to stop myself. I refused to go back inside the house. Not that day, not the next day, not for 2 full weeks. I stayed at my grandma's apartment during that time. No one believed me except my sisters. My dad went into the attic himself, checking every corner, and found nothing. No animal, no footprints, no signs of anything unusual. He claimed I must have imagined it, but I knew what I saw, and my sisters believed me because they heard things too. Eventually, life settled again, or at least it pretended to. I tried to forget what happened, and for a while, I did. Then came the night that proved none of it had been my imagination. Months later, my mom, my sisters, and I went out shopping. My dad stayed home. He had been drinking, nothing new, and he was sitting on the couch, cleaning and loading his handgun, something he definitely shouldn't have been doing while drunk. According to him, the gun went off by accident. The bullet shot upward into the ceiling. The moment the gun fired, he heard something, a sound he could barely describe, a half screech, half howl, something alive, something in pain. Then a heavy crash from my sister's room. Before he could even react, he saw something burst through the hallway, a brown, dog-like creature running full speed toward him. It wasn't a normal dog. It was big, too big, and its movements were fast and wild. It ran straight through the living room and out the front door, which my dad had left open. By the time it disappeared down the street, my dad was shaking. When we came home, he told us the entire story, and the evidence was impossible to deny. In my sister's closet, the attic entrance was broken outward, pieces cracked and splintered. There were deep scratch marks along the walls and the trim. The area looked like something had violently forced its way out. The neighbors told us they saw something strange run out of our house, a weird brown animal sprinting faster than any dog they had ever seen. We never saw or heard anything in the attic again, but none of us ever forgot. This happened when I was younger, back when my bedroom was in the basement of our house. It wasn't a creepy basement or anything, just the lower level of a normal family home. I had my room down there, a bathroom, a little hallway, and the stairs that led up to the kitchen on the main floor. I was used to it. It was quiet, private, and I liked having my own space. Nothing ever felt strange or spooky about it. Every Sunday afternoon, it was our routine to go to my grandma's house for dinner. My mom, my sister, and I would all go together. My stepdad always went duck hunting on weekends, so he'd leave early in the morning and be gone all day, sometimes until it was dark. Sundays became predictable. I knew exactly how the day would go, but on this particular Sunday, the routine shifted slightly. My mom left before me, taking my sister with her. I told her I would drive separately and meet them there. That meant for a little while I'd be in the house alone with my dog. It didn't bother me. I'd done it before. The house was familiar, quiet, steady, normal. I was in my room in the basement when my dog suddenly started barking, and that was strange. He almost never barked. He wasn't the type of dog that reacted to every noise or got startled easily. He only barked when something genuinely caught his attention, and even then, it was rare. At first, I thought maybe he heard my mom's car pulling back into the driveway, or maybe my stepdad had come home early from hunting. There was nothing scary in my mind, just confusion. I left my room and walked down the little hallway toward the stairs. My dog followed closely behind me, still barking in short bursts, his ears perked, body tense. That made me pause a little because he looked alert in a way I didn't usually see. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Above me, coming from the main floor, I heard footsteps. Very clear, very real footsteps. Not pipes banging, not a house settling. Actual weight moving around, slow and steady, across the upstairs floor. I didn't panic. I didn't even hesitate. I assumed it was my mom. Or maybe, though less likely, my stepdad had returned. There was nothing supernatural or frightening about my thought process. I just believed someone had come back inside for something they forgot. My dog, on the other hand, bolted up the stairs, ran around the corner, and into the kitchen. I heard his nails scraping the floor as he turned sharply. Then he started barking again, harder this time. Not playful barking, not excited barking. This was defensive barking, deep, loud, rapid. I took a few steps up the stairs, but before I reached the top, I heard something that made my entire body go cold. A voice I did not recognize whispered, "Shh, shh, it's okay." It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my stepdad. It wasn't anyone I knew. That whisper didn't sound playful or comforting. It sounded like someone trying to soothe an animal or silence it. My dog barked louder and more aggressively, and whoever was up there whispered again, still telling the dog to be quiet. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. My body reacted before my brain had time to think. I spun around, ran back down the stairs, and darted into the storage room. In that room, hidden away, was a handgun we kept for emergencies. I grabbed it with shaking hands, loaded it, and got into a position behind the door where I could see the hallway, but stay out of sight. I was so terrified that I was fully prepared to pull the trigger if anyone came down those stairs. I wasn't thinking about consequences or fear of the gun itself. I was thinking about survival. Whoever was in the house didn't belong there, and I was a kid alone with only a barking dog defending me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Every breath shook. I heard footsteps again, heavy ones, slow ones, moving above me like someone was pacing, then more creaks, then silence, total silence. No footsteps, no door opening, no running, no whisper. My dog suddenly came rushing back down the stairs, his nails clicking frantically on the floor. He stopped beside me, panting hard, still stiff with fear. Whatever he had seen or heard up there had shaken him too. I didn't wait another second. With the gun still in my hand, I sprinted down the hallway, up the stairs, past the kitchen, through the garage door, and straight to my car. I didn't feel safe until I was down the street, turning corners, getting farther and farther away from the house. When I got to my grandma's house, I walked straight to my mom and asked if she'd come back home after leaving. She said no, absolutely not. I believed her instantly. I didn't even bother asking my stepdad because he'd been out hunting all day, and there was no chance he had returned early and then vanished. For a long time, I told myself it must have been my imagination, or maybe a neighbor somehow wandered in and left before I got upstairs. But the doors had been locked. My mom and I checked them later when we returned. There were no signs of forced entry, no open windows, nothing. Still, I shoved the memory into the back of my mind, told myself it didn't matter, and tried to forget the whispering voice. And for about a year, I did. Then everything changed again. My other grandparents came to visit for a week. On a Saturday morning, everyone went shopping at the mall except for my grandpa. He stayed behind to paint the family room in the basement. Unlike me, my grandpa wasn't someone who scared easily. He was calm, steady, unshakable. The kind of man who had seen too much in life to be rattled by noises in a house. But later that week, while watching TV with my stepdad, he casually mentioned something about ghosts. They were laughing about how fake the show looked. Then my stepdad turned to me and said, "You know, your grandpa says he heard a ghost in our house once." I didn't think much of it at first, until he explained. Without knowing my story, and without me ever mentioning a single detail, my grandpa had supposedly heard the exact same thing I did. The dog barking, footsteps upstairs, a voice speaking softly. It happened on the day we all went shopping and he stayed behind to paint. My grandpa was downstairs working with the radio on low when the dog suddenly started barking. Not an alert bark, not a protective bark. It was the same kind of frantic, confused bark he had used the day I heard the whispering. Grandpa turned off the radio and listened. Someone was walking around upstairs. He figured we had come home early. Maybe someone forgot their purse. Maybe someone needed the bathroom, but after several seconds of footsteps and no one calling down to him, he started getting confused. He put down the paintbrush and climbed the stairs. The dog bolted past him, barking, and then Grandpa heard a voice talking to the dog. Not clearly, not loudly, but definitely speaking. He stepped into the kitchen expecting to see one of us, but the room was empty. All the doors were locked. No one had come back. My stepdad told me all this with a casual shrug, thinking it was just a funny coincidence. But as he talked, the entire memory I had buried hit me like a punch. Every detail, every sound, every second of fear. Two people, me and my grandpa, at two different times with no knowledge of each other's stories, heard the same thing. Footsteps, whispering, and someone upstairs who was not supposed to be there. That was 20 years ago. I was 14 when my grandpa's incident happened, and younger when mine did. I've grown up since then. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural. But I can't explain what happened in that house. And even now, after telling this story again for the first time in years, I still feel a cold chill running through me. Because imaginary things don't walk across floors, and imaginary things don't whisper to your dog. This happened when I was younger, back when my bedroom was in the basement of our house. It wasn't a creepy basement or anything, just the lower level of a normal family home. I had my room down there, a bathroom, a little hallway, and the stairs that led up to the kitchen on the main floor. I was used to it. It was quiet, private, and I liked having my own space. Nothing ever felt strange or spooky about it. Every Sunday afternoon, it was our routine to go to my grandma's house for dinner. My mom, my sister, and I would all go together. My stepdad always went duck hunting on weekends, so he'd leave early in the morning and be gone all day, sometimes until it was dark. Sundays became predictable. I knew exactly how the day would go, but on this particular Sunday, the routine shifted slightly. My mom left before me, taking my sister with her. I told her I would drive separately and meet them there. That meant for a little while I'd be in the house alone with my dog. It didn't bother me, I'd done it before. The house was familiar, quiet, steady, normal. I was in my room in the basement when my dog suddenly started barking, and that was strange. He almost never barked. He wasn't the type of dog that reacted to every noise or got startled easily. He only barked when something genuinely caught his attention, and even then, it was rare. At first I thought maybe he heard my mom's car pulling back into the driveway, or maybe my stepdad had come home early from hunting. There was nothing scary in my mind, just confusion. I left my room and walked down the little hallway toward the stairs. My dog followed closely behind me, still barking in short bursts, his ears perked, body tense. That made me pause a little because he looked alert in a way I didn't usually see. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. Above me, coming from the main floor, I heard footsteps. Very clear, very real footsteps. Not pipes banging, not a house settling. Actual weight moving around, slow and steady, across the upstairs floor. I didn't panic. I didn't even hesitate. I assumed it was my mom. Or maybe, though less likely, my stepdad had returned. There was nothing supernatural or frightening about my thought process. I just believed someone had come back inside for something they forgot. My dog, on the other hand, bolted up the stairs, ran around the corner and into the kitchen. I heard his nails scraping the floor as he turned sharply. Then he started barking again, harder this time. Not playful barking, not excited barking. This was defensive barking, deep, loud, rapid. I took a few steps up the stairs, but before I reached the top, I heard something that made my entire body go cold. A voice I did not recognize whispered, "Shh, shh, it's okay." It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my stepdad. It wasn't anyone I knew. That whisper didn't sound playful or comforting. It sounded like someone trying to soothe an animal or silence it. My dog barked louder and more aggressively, and whoever was up there whispered again, still telling the dog to be quiet. That was the moment everything inside me snapped. My body reacted before my brain had time to think. I spun around, ran back down the stairs, and darted into the storage room. In that room, hidden away, was a handgun we kept for emergencies. I grabbed it with shaking hands, loaded it, and got into a position behind the door where I could see the hallway, but stay out of sight. I was so terrified that I was fully prepared to pull the trigger if anyone came down those stairs. I wasn't thinking about consequences or fear of the gun itself. I was thinking about survival. Whoever was in the house didn't belong there, and I was a kid alone with only a barking dog defending me. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Every breath shook. I heard footsteps again, heavy ones, slow ones, moving above me like someone was pacing, then more creaks, then silence, total silence. No footsteps, no door opening, no running, no whisper. My dog suddenly came rushing back down the stairs, his nails clicking frantically on the floor. He stopped beside me, panting hard, still stiff with fear. Whatever he had seen or heard up there had shaken him too. I didn't wait another second. With the gun still in my hand, I sprinted down the hallway, up the stairs, past the kitchen, through the garage door, and straight to my car. I didn't feel safe until I was down the street, turning corners, getting farther and farther away from the house. When I got to my grandma's house, I walked straight to my mom and asked if she'd come back home after leaving. She said no, absolutely not. I believed her instantly. I didn't even bother asking my stepdad because he'd been out hunting all day, and there was no chance he had returned early and then vanished. For a long time, I told myself it must have been my imagination, or maybe a neighbor somehow wandered in and left before I got upstairs. But the doors had been locked. My mom and I checked them later when we returned. There were no signs of forced entry, no open windows, nothing. Still, I shoved the memory into the back of my mind, told myself it didn't matter, and tried to forget the whispering voice. And for about a year, I did. Then everything changed again. My other grandparents came to visit for a week. On a Saturday morning, everyone went shopping at the mall except for my grandpa. He stayed behind to paint the family room in the basement. Unlike me, my grandpa wasn't someone who scared easily. He was calm, steady, unshakable. The kind of man who had seen too much in life to be rattled by noises in a house. But later that week, while watching TV with my stepdad, he casually mentioned something about ghosts. They were laughing about how fake the show looked. Then my stepdad turned to me and said, "You know, your grandpa says he heard a ghost in our house once." I didn't think much of it at first, until he explained. Without knowing my story, and without me ever mentioning a single detail, my grandpa had supposedly heard the exact same thing I did. The dog barking, footsteps upstairs, a voice speaking softly. It happened on the day we all went shopping and he stayed behind to paint. My grandpa was downstairs working with the radio on low when the dog suddenly started barking. Not an alert bark, not a protective bark. It was the same kind of frantic, confused bark he had used the day I heard the whispering. Grandpa turned off the radio and listened. Someone was walking around upstairs. He figured we had come home early. Maybe someone forgot their purse. Maybe someone needed the bathroom, but after several seconds of footsteps and no one calling down to him, he started getting confused. He put down the paintbrush and climbed the stairs. The dog bolted past him, barking, and then Grandpa heard a voice talking to the dog. Not clearly, not loudly, but definitely speaking. He stepped into the kitchen expecting to see one of us, but the room was empty. All the doors were locked. No one had come back. My stepdad told me all this with a casual shrug, thinking it was just a funny coincidence. But as he talked, the entire memory I had buried hit me like a punch. Every detail, every sound, every second of fear, two people, me and my grandpa, at two different times with no knowledge of each other's stories, heard the same thing. Footsteps, whispering, and someone upstairs who was not supposed to be there. That was 20 years ago. I was 14 when my grandpa's incident happened, and younger when mine did. I've grown up since then. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural. But I can't explain what happened in that house. And even now, after telling this story again for the first time in years, I still feel a cold chill running through me. Because imaginary things don't walk across floors, and imaginary things don't whisper to your dog. My friend and I were driving through the back roads of a small country town, the kind of place where every field looks the same and the nights feel completely empty. If you've ever lived down south in those quiet little hick towns, you know exactly the kind of place I'm talking about. Endless farming roads, mostly dirt or gravel, stretching out between fields. High school kids always use them as hangouts, driving out there to smoke, drink, or do whatever they didn't want adults to see. No cops, no traffic, nothing but open space and sky. It was late that night, the kind of late where the world feels half asleep, where the cold air settles low and headlights look way too bright against the dark. My friend was driving and we were going around a tight curve. He was going a bit too fast, more focused on messing with his one-hitter than paying attention to the road. I remember telling him to chill, to slow down, to watch the damn road, but he wasn't listening. Then, out of nowhere, a black lab ran into the middle of the road. There was no time to react, no time to swerve, no time to brake. The dog ran straight into our path just as we came out of the curve. The impact thudded hard against the front end of the car, and I felt my stomach drop as the body rolled under us, but between the wheels, not under the tires. I felt the whole car jolt. My friend slammed on the brakes so fast that the tires skidded on the gravel, dust flying up behind us. He threw the car into park, and before I even processed what had happened, He had already flung open his door and gotten out. His face looked pale, panicked, like he hadn't taken a full breath yet. I opened my door, got out on the passenger side, and dropped to my knees to look under the car. Nothing, no dog, no shadow, no blood, no movement. I stood up slowly, confused, brushing dirt from my hands. That's when my friend said my name. Not normally, not like he was calling me to check something. His voice cracked. It was the most terrified tone I had ever heard from him. I looked over the roof of the car. There was a man standing beside him. A filthy man, covered in dirt, wearing old clothes that hung off him like rags. His hair was long and messy. He looked like he'd been living under a bridge or in the woods for years. He stood between my friend and the open driver's door, close enough that my friend couldn't get back into the car unless he went through him. I froze. My mind didn't jump to anything supernatural at first, just danger. Why was this man out here? Where had he come from? How did he show up so quickly? Was he lost, hurt, angry? Trying to stay calm, I said, "Hello, we accidentally hit a dog." The man turned his head and looked at me. It wasn't a normal look. It wasn't curiosity or confusion or anger. It was a hard stare, cold, intense, like he was looking straight through me, like he wasn't seeing my face, but something inside me. My skin crawled. The hair on the back of my neck rose. There was something wrong with him, something inhuman in the way he stood there so silently, not reacting, not speaking, not blinking. He didn't answer me. He didn't answer my friend. He just stared. Then he started walking, not toward us, not away from us, just walking slowly past my friend and into the darkness, like he belonged there, like he had simply stepped out of the night and was now stepping back into it. My friend didn't hesitate. He jumped into the car. I ran around, got in on my side, slammed the door, and locked it. Both of us were breathing hard, hands shaking, our whole bodies tight with fear. What the fuck was that? What the fuck, man? Who the hell was he? Where did he come from? We kept saying the same things over and over again, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My friend floored the gas pedal, spinning the gravel behind us, trying to get off the back road and back to the main highway as fast as possible. His hands were gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He was driving way too fast, swerving a little, cutting corners. I could hear his breathing, quick, uneven, almost frantic. My heart was slamming in my chest so hard that it hurt. Every time the headlights hit a tree or fence post, I flinched, expecting that man to be standing there again. Finally, we reached the highway. My friend pulled out way too fast, the tires squealing. The car felt like it was shaking from the speed and the tension inside it. My heart pounded even harder. Then we saw them. Red and blue lights flashed behind us. A cop car had been sitting somewhere in the dark and pulled out after seeing us swerve onto the road like maniacs. The lights filled the inside of the car, bouncing off the dashboard and the windshield. My stomach dropped. We pulled over. The officer walked up with his flashlight, shining it through the windows, blinding us every few seconds. "What's the matter, boys?" he asked. "You were driving a bit erratic back there. You boys been drinking?" We were shaking, talking too fast, stumbling over our words. My friend said, "No, sir. We hit a dog back there and we're just a bit freaked out." The officer didn't look convinced. He shined his light into our eyes, across the seats, around the floor, making us even more nervous. Then the beam of the flashlight moved to the back seat. The officer said, "You mean that dog?" We both turned. Lying across the back seat was a dead black lab. It had no blood on it, no dirt, no sign of having been dragged or carried. Just a dead dog laid out neatly across the seat, as if someone had placed it there gently. My entire chest felt like it collapsed inward. My pulse was pounding so violently I couldn't speak. My friend looked like he was about to pass out. Neither of us had opened the back door. Neither of us had touched the dog. And we had looked under. The car, There was nothing there. Nothing. Yet here it was. In the back seat. Dead. The officer didn't understand why we looked so horrified. He didn't know that 5 minutes earlier, the dog wasn't there. He didn't know about the man. He didn't know about the stare, the strange silence, the way he disappeared into the dark without a sound. My heart felt like it was going to punch through my chest. To this day, I remember the man's stare more clearly than the dead dog. Something was wrong with him. Something about him didn't fit the world the way people normally do, and the dog appearing out of nowhere, silently, impossibly, was something I still can't explain. All I know is that whatever we saw that night, whatever we hit, whatever climbed into the back seat, it wasn't normal, and I've never driven those roads again. A couple of years back, some friends and I decided we were overdue for a long break from work. We all had vacation time saved up, and one night someone threw out the idea of taking a 2-week road trip across several states, starting in the southeast, driving up through Pennsylvania, then looping back down. The plan was simple: drive through the night, find a place to pitch our tents before dusk or right after dawn, sleep a few hours, then spend the day exploring whatever area we ended up in. Sometimes we'd stop near a city, sometimes out in the middle of nowhere. It became this strange but fun rhythm of movement, exhaustion, and discovery. By the time we drove into Alabama, the adventure still felt exciting. If you've ever driven through Alabama's interstate, especially north to south, you know how mind-numbingly straight and repetitive it can be. Trees, trees, more trees, the kind of drive that lulls you into staring at the road until your brain melts. We knew this ahead of time, so instead of sticking to the interstate, we routed our trip through the more rural areas. Fields, dirt roads, small forgotten highways, anything to keep things interesting. We were about 3/4 of the way up the state when we decided to stop and rest for the morning. It was early, the sun was up, but our brains were fried from driving all night. We found a huge open field with soft green grass and no fences, no signs, no trespassing, nothing. Just wind, sky, and space stretching out around us. It looked safe enough, peaceful enough, so we pulled over and set up our tents. The idea when we camped wasn't to have some relaxing wilderness retreat. It was purely so we could lie down and sleep without being cramped inside the car, shoulder to shoulder, drooling on each other. So after the tents were up, everyone crashed. Some slept inside, some outside. The world was quiet and warm, the grass soft beneath us. Around noon, everyone was finally awake and ready to pack up. The field looked even more beautiful in the midday sun. Short, bright grass, a gentle breeze, and about 500 feet away, a barn that looked oddly picturesque. It wasn't old or run down. It looked new, like something from a postcard. Red wood, clean roof, white trim reflecting the sunlight. We decided we should check it out before hitting the road again. We loaded everything into the car and walked across the field toward the barn. Everyone wandered in different directions once we got there, some looking inside, some poking around outside. I ended up off to the side where taller grass had grown up around a few pieces of rusted farm equipment. That's when I heard one of my friends yelling from inside the barn. Her voice echoed, sharp and urgent, bouncing off the wooden walls. I jogged around the corner and went in. 2 of my other friends had already joined her. They were all gathered around a square section of the floor near the back, what looked like a trap door. A big one. Thick wood, metal hinges, the kind of thing that didn't belong in a modern-looking barn. My friend said she heard crying. Not animal crying, human crying, a child maybe. The sound had led her straight to that trap door, but as soon as she reached it, the crying stopped. We all stood there for a moment, silent, listening. Nothing, not a sound, just the creaking of the barn roof and the wind drifting through the open doorway. I looked up, trying to say something. Maybe a joke to break the tension, maybe a suggestion about leaving, but right as I opened my mouth, a massive crash slammed against the underside of the trapdoor. Everyone screamed, and everyone ran, except me. I don't know why. I don't know what went wrong in my brain or why my instincts didn't fire like they should have. My friends bolted toward the exit instantly, but I froze. My legs turned into concrete, my lungs locked up. All I could do was stare at the trapdoor. My brain screamed at me to move, to run, to get out. Every instinct I had was begging me to do something, anything, but I stood there, wide-eyed, frozen, helpless. Then something happened, something I still don't understand. My body snapped out of the freeze like a rubber band whipping back into place. One moment I was frozen, the next I spun around so fast it felt like my bones twisted. My legs finally responded, ready to run. Just as the first step left my foot, the world went black. Not like fainting, not like darkness from closing your eyes. Black like something covered me. It felt exactly like someone threw a heavy blanket over my head, a thick, suffocating weight that smothered the light instantly. I couldn't see a thing, couldn't even see my own hands. Then the screaming started, a child's scream, loud, piercing, endless. It wasn't coming from far away. It was right next to me, or above me, or inside me. I couldn't tell. It was everywhere, screaming without breath, without pause, without any break at all. Just a single, endless shriek. I think I screamed too. I'm not sure. I couldn't hear myself over the sound. My whole body shook. Something cold, freezing cold, pressed against my chest. It felt like a hand. Small, icy fingers curling around my heart and squeezing. Each second made it harder to breathe, harder to stay upright, harder to think. Instinct took over. I started thrashing wildly, swinging my arms, trying to hit something, anything. I couldn't see. I couldn't hear anything but the scream. All I could do was fight blindly. It didn't help. The cold tightened in my chest. I panicked harder. My legs stumbled forward. I forced myself to run, even though I didn't know where the hell I was going. And then, a hard impact. I ran full speed into a low wooden beam. The world didn't fade. It snapped off like a light. I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying in the grass next to our car. The sun was still bright. My left eye was sealed shut because dried blood had glued it closed. My head throbbed with pulsing pain, and when I reached up to touch it, I felt a deep, open cut running across my forehead. All three of my friends were sitting quietly nearby. No one was talking. No one even looked at each other. They all looked hollow, like something inside them had drained out. When they saw me wake up, they helped me sit up and handed me a bottle of water to rinse the blood from my face. I used what little first aid gear I had to bandage the cut. Finally, I asked what had happened, how they found me, what they saw, how long I had been out. Their story didn't make me feel any better. They said they had made it back to the car and were ready to leave when they realized I wasn't with them. They tried the doors. They were locked, which meant they couldn't even start the car. They were debating running to town to get the police. They even started walking that direction. But then they heard my screaming coming from the barn. All three of them admitted they didn't want to go back. They were terrified. They didn't want to see whatever had been behind that trapdoor. But they did. Somehow. Maybe because I was their friend. Maybe because they felt guilty. Maybe because they had no choice. They found me lying unconscious on the floor. The trapdoor was now wide open. Wide open. They said no one would come near my head or chest because that meant standing with their backs to the door. So they grabbed me by my feet and dragged me out of the barn, across the floor, through the doorway, and all the way back to the field. They said the entire time, the hair on the back of their necks was standing up like something was watching them. Then one of them told me to turn around and look at the barn. I did. And I swear, my heart stopped. The beautiful barn we had approached earlier, the bright paint, the clean exterior, the picture-perfect appearance was gone. In its place was a rotting, decrepit structure. The roof sagged. The wood was gray and splintered. The windows were broken. It looked abandoned for decades. The barn we had walked into didn't exist anymore, or it never existed at all. When I turned back to my friends, they were staring at me with blank, exhausted expressions. No one said anything. There was nothing left to say. Without a word, I handed my keys to one friend, climbed into the car, and told them to drive. We didn't stop until we were miles away. For the rest of the trip, we never camped in open fields again. Only real campgrounds, or we slept in the car. No more barns, no more abandoned structures, no more random stops. None of us has talked about that day since, and I don't think we ever will. Sorry to interrupt. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Shadow Archives for daily true horror content that will haunt your dreams and keep you wondering what lurks in the shadows. And don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story when the darkness calls out to you. When I was 6 and my brother was 8, we shared a bedroom in a town home. It wasn't a big place, and the two of us slept in a room that had one shared wall with the neighbors. At that age, everything felt a little bigger than it really was, a little scarier, a little more mysterious. Most of the creepy things that happened in that room came from our imaginations. At least, that's what we believed back then. For example, we had this friend, as we called it, that lived in the corner by the bedroom door. We imagined it was a black widow spider that only came out at night. Sometimes we swore we saw something skitter across the corner, and we'd whisper to it like it could understand us. We even made up stories about what it did during the day, like it had a little spider job or spider friends. It sounds silly now, but when you're a kid, you can make anything feel alive. One night, though, something happened that had nothing to do with imagination. My brother and I were trying to fall asleep. The house was dark and quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of wind outside. Monsoon season in Arizona can make a lot of noise. Wind blowing hard against doors, rain slapping windows, walls creaking under sudden pressure. So when we first heard the banging on the wall, we didn't think much of it. But the banging didn't sound like wind. It didn't have that uneven, gusting rhythm. It was steady, heavy, repeated, thump, 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 right against the shared wall. We let it go on for a few minutes, hoping it would stop, but it didn't. It became more insistent, almost angry. Finally, both of us screamed for our mom. She came into the room looking exhausted, her hair messy, her face tense. She asked, "What?" like she was already dealing with too much. We told her about the banging. We told her it sounded like someone was hitting our wall from the other side. But the moment she stepped into the room, it stopped. Just silence. She sighed and told us it was just the wind. And honestly, that explanation made sense. It really was storm season, and weird noises were common. She told us she'd check on us again soon, kissed us goodnight, and left. What we didn't know at the time was that she was having a terrible evening. She'd been dealing with her boyfriend's drug problem for months, and that night she had finally decided to break up with him. She was emotional, stressed out, trying to keep herself together. The last thing she needed was her kids talking about imaginary banging on the walls. But not 5 minutes after she walked out, the banging started again. And this time, it was louder, stronger, closer somehow, like whatever was hitting the wall was now right beside our beds. We screamed again, this time in real fear. I leapt out of bed and ran as fast as I could into the living room, still yelling for my mom. When I turned the corner, I saw something I didn't expect. My mom was standing in a defensive stance, her fists clenched, tears running down her face. Her boyfriend was in front of her, angry, breathing heavily, looking like he was on the edge of exploding. There was no banging on the walls now, only tension filling the space between them. He grunted something we couldn't understand, then stormed out the door. Once he got to his car, he sat there and held down the horn for a full minute, blasting the noise through the entire neighborhood. It wasn't a goodbye, it wasn't an accident. It was rage, frustration. His version of slamming every door in the world at once. When he finally drove off, my mom closed the door quickly, locked it, slid the bolt, and secured the chain. She was shaking a little. Then she took a deep breath and walked me back to the bedroom. My brother was sitting up in bed, eyes wide. He said the banging stopped the moment I screamed and left the room. My mom sat down with us, her voice softer now, and stayed until both of us fell asleep. The house was quiet for the rest of the night. I remember waking up once or twice, listening for more noise, but nothing came. The storm had calmed outside too. It felt like the world had finally gone still. But the next morning, everything changed. My mom woke us unusually early. She never did that. Never woke us before school unless something was very wrong. She sat us down in the living room, her expression serious, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't mention her breakup. She didn't talk about her boyfriend or the fight or the horn. She was focused on something else. She pointed toward our front door. The doorknob was completely busted and hanging loose. The bolt lock was scraped and damaged, like someone had tried to pry it open. Even the chain lock had fresh scratches. There were police officers outside, 6 of them, talking to neighbors and examining the area. My mom explained that our neighbors had been broken into during the night. Someone had cleaned their entire house out. Not just valuables, everything. Electronics, decorations, clothes, food from their cabinets. They had taken so much that the place looked abandoned. Then she told us the part that made my stomach twist. Those same burglars tried to get into our home too, but the bolt, lock, and chain had held. Whoever tried to break in couldn't force the door open, so they gave up. At least, that's what we thought until we went next door. We knew their kids. We played with them often, but they had been at their grandmother's that night, which was the only reason they weren't inside when the burglary happened. Their whole house was torn apart. Cabinets emptied, drawers pulled out, furniture flipped over. Every room looked like a tornado had passed through it. But everyone, police included, was avoiding the living room. And when we finally walked in, we saw why. The wall that connected their living room to our bedroom had a massive indent in it, a huge crater about 6 feet across and nearly a foot deep, like someone had spent hours hitting it with something heavy, trying to break through. They hadn't been banging on our door. They had been trying to break through the wall and into our room. We realized then that the pounding noise we heard wasn't the wind at all. It was burglars trying to chisel their way into our house. The reason it sounded like it came from different places was because they were hitting different sections of the wall, trying to find a weak point. But they didn't know something important. Our unit had been added after the original buildings. The shared wall they were trying to break through wasn't just drywall. It was solid brick. They were punching and smashing and chiseling at brick for hours, probably getting more and more desperate as time passed. If our home had been built like the others, they might have gotten through. They might have come into our room while we were sleeping, but instead, they wasted the night trying to break through the wrong wall. Later that morning, one of the officers quietly told my mom that the burglars had likely been in our neighbor's house when we screamed. That might have been what scared them off from continuing. After that day, my mom never told us it's just the wind again. She made sure we always locked every door. She always checked every window. She never brushed off a strange noise, not once, because that night taught all of us something terrifying and unforgettable. Sometimes the sounds you hear in the dark aren't your imagination. Sometimes there's someone trying to get in. It all started back between the years of 1982 and 1985. I was just a very young child at the time, probably between 3 and 5 years old, and I had a sister who was a year younger than me. My parents had decided to start a new chapter of their lives and moved us into a house in Brisbane. My father was a hard-working journalist, although sadly he has since passed away, and my mother was a midwife. At that time in our lives, she had taken a break from her career to stay at home and look after my sister and me. We were a typical young family looking for a happy home, but the place we moved into was anything but normal. The house itself had a very strange and unique layout. From the street, it looked like a simple single-story home, but because of the way the land sloped, it turned into a double-story house at the back. The front section contains our living room and my bedroom. To get to the rest of the house, you had to walk through a carpeted landing that connected the front to the back. From there, stairs went up to the master bedroom on the left, a nursery straight ahead for my sister, and a bathroom on the right. At the bottom of those stairs, there was a side door that led out to an entertainment area, where we had a barbecue set up, which then opened up into the backyard. However, if you ignore that side door and turn right at the bottom of the stairs, you walk under an archway. This archway leads into a large concrete room underneath the house, which we call the rumpus room. It was shaped like the letter L. Tucked inside this concrete room, right under the stairs, was a dark, tiled laundry room. At the very back of this large playroom was another door that led directly out to the backyard. It sounds a bit complicated, but it is important to understand the layout, because the way the house was built played a huge role in the terrifying things that happened to us. It was a big house with many dark corners, and for a young mother often left alone, it became a place of isolation rather than comfort. My father worked very long hours and was often away late into the night, chasing stories for his newspaper. He was barely ever home, and looking back on it now, that strain probably contributed to why they eventually divorced. Because he was gone so much, my mother was often left alone in this large, strange house at night, with just a toddler and a baby for company. She later told me that she started noticing things were wrong after only a month or two of living there. The first sign was our dog, Mandy. Mandy was an old, loyal dog who usually loved being around the family, but in this new house she refused to come inside. She spent all of her time in her kennel in the backyard. My mother noticed that if she was outside hanging up the washing, Mandy would happily follow her around the yard. But the moment my mother walked towards the back door to go inside, Mandy would stop. Her tail will drop between her legs, and she will start whimpering in eviction, fear. She will not cross the threshold. At the time, Mum just thought it was odd behavior and brushed it off, thinking the dog was just being a dog. She had no idea it was the first warning. As time went on, things went from just being odd to being physically impossible. The laundry room, which was tucked away in that dark area under the stairs, would flood for absolutely no reason. My parents would check the pipes, but nothing was leaking, and yet the floor would be covered in water while the rooms right next to it remained completely dry. It made no sense. Then there were the light bulbs. My mother and father will walk down to the back of the house and find light bulbs shattered and blown out of their sockets. It wasn't just a burnt-out bulb. It was violent. My mother began to hate walking to the back of the house at night. She told me years later that as soon as she stepped onto that stairway landing, the hair on her arms and the back of her neck would stand up. She described a heavy, sinking feeling like she was being watched by someone standing in the shadows. Checking on my baby sister in the nursery became a terrifying task. Every night, she had to force herself to walk down that hallway, dreading what she might see or feel, even though checking on her sleeping baby should have been a happy, peaceful moment. The weirdness continued to escalate over the next few months. It wasn't just feelings anymore, it sounded. My mother and father started hearing the distinct sound of shuffling feet coming from the rumpus room below them while they were lying in bed at night. They would freeze and listen, but there was nobody down there. Other times my mother would be sitting in the front of the house knitting or watching television by herself while Dad was at work. Suddenly she would hear clear, loud laughter coming from the back of the house. It was the kind of laughter that made your blood run cold because she knew she was supposed to be alone. She would get up and check, thinking maybe I had woken up, but I would be fast asleep in my bed. The back of the house will be empty and silent, but the feeling of a presence remains. One night, my aunt and my 18-month-old cousin came to stay with us. My dad and my uncle were busy painting my grandmother's lounge room after work, so the women were at our house with the kids. My mom and my aunt were chatting about the struggles of raising babies. My aunt mentioned that my little cousin was teething and had been crying a lot at night because of the pain. On this particular night, the baby was hurt, and we had run out of teething gel. My mother, trying to be helpful, volunteered to drive down to the local pharmacy to pick up some Bonjela to help numb the baby's gums. Before she left, she decided to be honest with her sister. She told my aunt that she thought there was something wrong with the house. She explained that my dad didn't believe her, but she wanted to warn my aunt. She told her that if she heard anything strange while she was gone, she shouldn't be surprised. My aunt, who considers herself a very spiritual and strong person, laughed it off. She told my mom that she was talking rubbish. She said she had been in haunted houses before and would have sensed if anything was wrong, so she was sure the house was fine. My mom just nodded and left, promising to be back in 20 or 30 minutes. When my mother returned from the pharmacy, she saw my uncle's car parked in front of the house. He had come back early. Sensing that something bad had happened, Mom walked inside to find a chaotic scene. My aunt was sobbing uncontrollably, and my uncle was trying to comfort her. My father, being the skeptic that he was poking fun at her, asking if she had gotten spooked. My mother immediately asked if they had heard something. My aunt, through her tears, explained that after my mother had left, the house came alive. She could feel heavy thumps coming up through the floorboards, shaking the room. Then she heard a voice calling her name, followed by laughter coming from the back of the house. She was absolutely disenchanted. She told my mother that the house was evil. My mother was petrified, but she finally had a witness. It wasn't just in her head. Desperate for answers, my mother started talking to the neighbors to see if they knew anything about the history of the house. She got chatting to a neighbor who revealed a chilling backstory. The neighbor told her that the previous renter was a woman who had gone a bit crazy after a messy divorce. Her life had gone downhill, and she had gotten involved in a strange religion. The neighbor said that people will come to the house every few weeks, and they will hold vows in the house to contact spirits. My mother, who was a churchgoer at this stage, felt a cold shiver go up her spine. She realized this might explain everything. The neighbor continued saying that the woman was a Satanist. When my mother asked where they used to hold these rituals, the neighbor pointed to the rumpus room. They used to see candles burning in the windows of that bottom room late at night. That was where they invited things in. From that moment on, my mother was determined to move out. She didn't want us living there a second longer. However, my father still didn't really believe her. He thought it was all nonsense, so he refused to move. We were put staying, despite the fact that all of our toys and tricycles were kept in the rumpus room. My mother noticed that I would never, ever play down there. Even though I was just a toddler, I knew something was wrong with that space. She had initially thought I just didn't want to be away from her, but she realized it was afraid. My older cousin, who was a year older than me, also flatly refused to go down to the rumpus room when she visited. She told my aunt and my mother that the things down there scared her. Children are often more sensitive to these things than adults, and we all sensed the darkness in that room. A few more months went by, and the activity began to target me directly. Apparently, I started complaining to my mom about a man who sat on top of my wardrobe and looked at me at night. Can you imagine a toddler telling you that? My mother was horrified. She immediately got rid of the wardrobe, hoping that would stop me from seeing the figure. A few weeks later, something even more aggressive happened. My mother was getting changed in her bedroom at the top of the house. I was downstairs at the front of the house, watching Sesame Street on TV. When she tried to leave her room, she found the door was locked. It wouldn't budge. She started shaking the door violently, but it was stuck fast. She called out to me to help, but I was too far away and distracted by the TV to hear her. At this stage, she was 7 months pregnant with my baby brother. She was trapped. She had no choice. Terrified and trapped, she opened the window. She was forced to climb out of the window and shimmy down the drain pipe onto the side entertainment area. It was a dangerous and undignified thing for a pregnant woman to do, but she was desperate. She ran back into the house through the side door and raced up the stairs. When she got to her bedroom door, she found it wide open and unlocked. She was confused and angry. She came down and scolded me, telling me never to lock Mummy in her room again. I looked at her with total innocence and claimed that I hadn't moved from the TV. I had been watching Sesame Street the whole time. My mother looked at me and believed me. She knew I couldn't have done it. About this time, she decided enough was enough. She approached the local pastor to ask for help. He gave her 2 options. The first option was to ignore it and hope it went away. The second option was to play loud hymns and read Bible verses to try and anger whatever was there into leaving. However, he warned her that this could backfire. He said it might anger the entities and they might start throwing things around. It was a risky move. Around this time, my great-grandmother came to visit. She was a very religious and perceptive woman. She walked into the rumpus room one day to get a toy for me. When she came back up, she looked at my mother and said that there were evil faces looking at her and leering at her down there. Later, a different pastor confirms our worst fears. He told my mother that whether she believed it or not, there were 2 or 3 demonic entities reflected in the back of our house. That was the final straw. My mother started packing our stuff immediately. She began looking for another house, desperate to get us out. My dad and she were in the process of divorcing by this stage, so he was gone often, leaving her alone to handle the move. But the house wasn't done with us yet. The evil presence had one last parting shot, and it was the most terrifying event of all. My mother was just a few days away from moving us out. She went to check on my sister, who was now 2 years old, while she was sleeping in the nursery upstairs. This was the room that used to be the nursery, but is now her bedroom. When my mother looked into the cot, her heart stopped. It was empty. She looked across the room and saw the window above the cot was widely open. Now you have to understand, this was an old-fashioned window. It was a heavy horizontal sliding window with a vertical latch halfway up the side. It was difficult for an adult to open, let alone a 2-year-old child. The fly screen that should have been behind it had its rubber seal ripped out, and a flap of the screen was swinging in the breeze. My mother ran to the window and looked down. Underneath the window was a fiberglass annex that covered the back door. It now had a huge dent in it, and its supports were broken. Down in the backyard, she saw my little sister crawling around on the grass, with the dog playing beside her. My mother screamed and ran down the stairs. She called the doctor immediately. The doctor came to the house and checked my sister over. Miraculously, she was fine, although she had a bit of a concussion. It was a miracle she hadn't broken her neck or worse. When the doctor, my dad, and my mom asked my sister what happened, she just pointed up and said, "Doggy, down, down, down." It was chilling. Evidently, she had fallen out of the window, hit the annex, and landed in the yard where she saw the dog. But the logistics were impossible. She could not have climbed out of that cot, she could not have reached the latch, and she certainly could not have slid that heavy window open. It seemed too convenient, almost as if she had been lured or thrown. Needless to say, we didn't stay another night. We were gone that very day. My mother grabbed us, and we left that house of horrors behind forever. We never went back. To this day, when my family talks about that time, the fear is still real. Every word of this story is true, and it remains the most terrifying chapter of our lives. It was the summer of 2024, a time that feels both like yesterday and a lifetime ago. I was working in Ocean City, Maryland, a popular vacation spot that gets incredibly busy during the hot months. The town is full of energy, tourists, the smell of saltwater taffy, and the sound of crashing waves. I had landed a job at a laser tag center, which was a pretty standard gig for a college student. It was loud, dark, and full of flashing lights inside, but it was a job. My good friend Steve also worked there with me. Having a friend on the same shift made the long hours go by much faster. We were both at that strange transitional stage of life, the summer between our freshman and sophomore years of college. We felt like adults, but looking back, we were still just kids ourselves in many ways. Life was finally kicking into gear, and we felt like we had the whole world ahead of us. We had no idea that this specific summer day would change the way we looked at the world forever. On this particular day, Steve and I arrived at the laser tag center a bit earlier than our scheduled shift. We liked to get there early to hang out, maybe play a few rounds of the arcade games before we had to put on our uniforms and deal with customers. We played a few games and managed to win a handful of tickets. We weren't interested in the big prizes, so we just redeemed them for those small, bouncy rubber balls. It was a silly, carefree way to start the day. After we got our prizes, we decided to retreat to the back of the building. There was a small area behind the store where the employees would go to take breaks, smoke cigarettes, and just get away from the noise of the arcade for a moment. It was our little sanctuary. The area behind the store wasn't much to look at. It was basically a concrete patch near the parking lot, but it was quiet. Directly behind our building, separated by a wooden fence and some bushes, was a 4-story apartment building. Ocean City is packed with these kinds of buildings. It was the height of summer, so the place was absolutely full of happy vacationers. You could hear the sounds of families unpacking their cars, music playing from balconies, and the general buzz of people enjoying their holidays. This specific building had a design that is very common in beach towns. The hallways and the stairs that led to the different suites were all on the outside of the building rather than inside. It was like an open-air motel design. There were metal railings along the walkways to keep people from falling off, but everything was open to the elements. Steve and I were tossing our little rubber balls back and forth, smoking our cigarettes and talking about life. We discussed how school was going, our plans for the upcoming semester, and just general college stuff. The sun was hot and the air was humid, typical for a Maryland summer. Behind us, over in the apartment building, I noticed a group of kids playing. They were running along the open walkways on the upper floors. It looked like they were playing tag or hide and seek. They were laughing and shouting, having the time of their lives. I watched them idly, remembering when I used to play like that. However, my attention was drawn to one kid in particular. He wasn't really interested in the game the others were playing. Instead, he was on the top floor, leaning far out over the railing. He looked like he was spitting down onto the pavement below, or maybe dropping little pebbles. I remember staring at him and feeling a sudden cold knot form in my stomach. It was a distinct thought, clear as day. I thought to myself that the kid was going to fall. It wasn't just a worry, it felt like a premonition. I turned to Steve, feeling the need to voice this sudden anxiety. I told him to look up and said that the kid was making me nervous and that I thought he was going to fall. Steve, being his usual relaxed self, just laughed it off. He threw his rubber ball at me, hitting me in the arm. He told me that I was being paranoid and that kind of talk freaked him out, so I should shut up. He picked up the ball to keep playing our catch game, trying to lighten the mood. I tried to shake it off. I wanted to be like Steve, unbothered and relaxed. I sat down on one of those concrete parking blocks, the kind that stop cars from rolling too far forward. I tried to focus on Steve and our conversation, but I couldn't get the image of that kid out of my head. I kept glancing back up at the fourth floor. Steve was talking about something, rambling on, probably trying to distract me or making fun of me for being a worrier. He managed to steal my attention for just a few seconds. I looked at him, forcing a smile, trying to be present in the moment. But that moment was shattered in an instant. We both heard it. It started with a scream. It wasn't a playful scream of a child playing tag. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. It was short, sharp, and was immediately followed by a sound that haunts my nightmares to this day. It was a wet, heavy thud. It was the worst sound I will ever hear in my life. It was the sound of a human body hitting the pavement from a great height. The silence that followed immediately after was deafening, heavy, and suffocating. I didn't think, I didn't process. My body just reacted. I jumped up from the parking block and sprinted toward the wooden fence that separated our lot from the apartment building. I vaulted over the fence and pushed my way through the thick, scratchy bushes that lined the property. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I burst through the foliage and onto the pavement of the apartment parking lot, and there he was. The kid was lying face first in the parking lot. He had fallen 4 stories. A puddle of blood was already expanding rapidly around his head. It was moving fast, soaking into the hot asphalt. I froze for a split second, my brain trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Behind me, I could hear Steve coming through the bushes. His reaction time hadn't been as fast as mine. He was still processing the shock. I spun around on the balls of my feet and screamed at him. I yelled at him to call 911 immediately. I was shouting random things, telling him to get help, get ice, get water, just anything to do something. I turned back to the building and yelled up to the other kids who were frozen on the walkways, staring down in horror. I screamed at them to go get whatever adult they had with them. I approached the boy on the ground. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The sight was horrific. Through the fracture in his skull, I could see gray matter. The injury was catastrophic. The blood was pooling thick and dark around him. It belied his true condition because despite the severity of the impact, he was not dead. In that moment, seeing the extent of his injuries, a dark thought crossed my mind. I almost wished he was already dead because the suffering he was enduring was unimaginable. He started screaming. It wasn't a scream of pain anymore. It was a scream of pure panic and confusion. He was calling out for Jesus. He was begging for help. I am an atheist. I don't believe in God or an afterlife. But hearing this broken child crying out to Jesus shook me to my core. I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know how to comfort him. I knelt beside him, terrified to touch him, but terrified to leave him alone. His crying was becoming more frantic, desperate, and shrill. I could see the color fading from his skin, turning a sickly pale gray against the vibrant red of the blood. I felt completely useless. I just wanted to tell him it would be okay, but I knew it wouldn't be. Finally, the other kids had found an adult. It was his aunt. She came running out of one of the ground floor apartments, screaming. Her screams mixed with the boys, creating a cacophony of despair. She was frantic, completely out of her mind with grief and panic. She rushed toward him, her hands reaching out to grab him. I knew immediately that I had to stop her. I had taken basic first aid courses, and the one thing I knew for sure was that you never, ever move someone who has fallen from a height. If he had broken his back or his neck, moving him could sever the spinal cord and kill him or paralyze him instantly. I stood up and blocked her path. It was all I could do to hold her back. She was a grown woman fueled by adrenaline and terror, and she fought me. She kicked at me, scratched at me, and screamed at me to let her go to her nephew. But there was no way I was letting her move that kid. I had to be the bad guy. I had to be the physical barrier between her and the boy. I kept yelling at her that she couldn't move him, that she had to wait for the ambulance, but she wasn't listening. She was just a wall of panic. Finally, more adults from the apartment complex began to arrive at the scene. They saw what was happening and helped me. They grabbed the aunt and pulled her back, holding her as she collapsed into hysterics. The scene was chaotic. People were crying, shouting, and running around. In all the confusion, I realized I hadn't heard sirens yet. I didn't know if Steve had managed to make the call or if he was still in shock. I pulled out my own phone from my pocket. I wanted to call Steve to check on the status of 911 or to dial it myself if he hadn't. As I held my phone up, looking at the screen, the aunt looked up from where the neighbors were holding her. Her eyes locked onto my phone. In her grief-stricken and confused state, she jumped to the worst possible conclusion. She thought I was standing over her dying nephew recording a video or taking a picture. She screamed at me with a voice full of venom. She yelled that I better not be taking any pictures and called me a sick fuck. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't taking pictures, I was trying to save his life. But I couldn't explain that to her, I couldn't defend myself. Her words, just like the boy's screams, still echo in my skull to this day. It was a misunderstanding born of tragedy, but it stung deeper than I can describe. The boy had grown quiet by the time the ambulance finally arrived. The frantic screaming had faded into shallow, ragged breathing, and then into silence. He was still. The paramedics rushed in, taking over the scene with professional efficiency. They stabilized him, put him on a board, and loaded him into the back of the ambulance. The lights flashed, and the siren wailed as they sped away, leaving us standing in the bloody parking lot. He was still alive when they took him away, holding on to life by a thread. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving me shaking and cold despite the summer heat. Steve and I didn't say much to each other. We went back to the store, but we were useless. I later learned that the boy didn't make it. He died from his injuries. I never asked for his name. I never looked it up in the papers. At the time, I thought that maybe if he remained just a nameless kid in my memory, I could get over it easier. I thought that keeping a distance would help me heal, but that was a mistake. Now, looking back, I wish I knew who he was. I wish I knew his name so I could honor his memory properly instead of just remembering the horror of his final moments. That summer in Ocean City was supposed to be about fun, friends, and freedom. Instead, it became the summer I learned how fragile life really is. I still think about that day often. I think about the premonition I had, and I wonder if there was anything I could have done differently. Could I have yelled at him sooner? Could I have run over there before he fell? Logic tells me no, but the guilt lingers. The sound of the thud, the boy's prayers, and the aunt's accusation are etched into my mind. It was a tragedy that unfolded in seconds but has lasted a lifetime in my memory. We were just kids working a summer job, but on that day, we grew up way too fast. There is a specific kind of fear that settles deep in your stomach when you realize that the place you call home, your sanctuary from the world, has been violated. We all like to believe that when we lock our front doors at night, we are safe and alone with our families. We like to think that the walls around us are solid barriers against the chaos of the outside world. But sometimes those barriers are not as solid as we think. and the danger isn't trying to get in, because it is already inside. I want to tell you about two separate incidents that happened in the suburbs, stories that seem like urban legends but are terrifyingly real. They are stories about the thin line between safety and danger, and they will make you want to check your attics and basements before you go to sleep tonight. The first story concerns a regular family, let's call them the Millers, who lived in a quiet, friendly neighborhood. It was the kind of place where people waved to each other and mowed their lawns on Saturdays. The family consisted of a husband, a wife, and their 2 children. For the most part, their life was completely normal until the small things started happening. It began innocently enough, so subtly that they barely noticed it at first. It started with the dishes. The family would leave the house in the morning for work and school, making sure the kitchen was tidy. The wife was particularly neat, and she always made sure the dishwasher was loaded and the counters were wiped down before she grabbed her keys. However, when they would return home in the late afternoon, they would find something out of place. Sometimes it was a single drinking glass sitting on the counter with a small amount of water left in the bottom. Other times it was a plate with a few crumbs on it left on the dining table. At first, the wife assumed she was just being forgetful. She thought that perhaps she had been in a rush that morning and had forgotten to put the glass in the dishwasher. She would shrug it off, wash the glass, and go about her evening. But then it kept happening. It wasn't every day, which made it even more confusing. It happened just often enough to be noticeable, maybe once or twice a week. The husband started to get annoyed, assuming the kids were sneaking home or that his wife was becoming messy. They would have small, irritated arguments about it. He would ask why she left a dirty plate out, and she would insist, with frustration in her voice, that she hadn't. This went on for a couple of months. The atmosphere in the house began to change. A low-level tension settled over the family. They felt like they were going crazy. The wife started to doubt her own memory. She would stand in the kitchen before leaving, staring at the empty counters, imprinting the image in her mind, only to come home and find a wrapper on the floor or a chair pulled out from the table. They also noticed that their food seemed to be disappearing faster than usual. The milk carton felt lighter than it should have been. A loaf of bread would be missing a few slices. They blamed the kids, of course. They told them to stop snacking so much, but the kids denied it. The family had no idea that while they were out living their lives, someone else was living a shadow life right there in their home. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. The husband and wife had left work a little early to meet up and handle some errands. They pulled into their driveway, chatting about what to make for dinner when they noticed something wrong. There was a strange haze in the air, a gray mist that was drifting out from the cracks of their garage door. It took a second for their brains to register what it was. It was smoke. Panic set in immediately. They thought maybe an electrical appliance had shorted out or that something had caught fire spontaneously. The husband, acting on adrenaline, grabbed the garage door opener from his visor and pressed the button. The heavy metal door began to rumble and slowly roll upward. As the daylight flooded into the dark garage, the smoke billowed out thicker. The husband jumped out of the car, ready to grab a fire extinguisher or a hose, but he froze in his tracks. As the door lifted high enough to see inside, he didn't just see a fire. He saw a man. There was a stranger standing in the middle of their garage. He was dirty, disheveled, and looked wild. He wasn't trying to put the fire out. He was holding a can of gasoline and a lighter. He was actively setting their house on fire. The stranger looked up as the door opened, and his eyes locked with the husband's. There was a moment of absolute terrifying silence where nobody moved. The husband realized instantly that this wasn't a random arsonist. This was someone who had been disturbed. The husband shouted at his wife to lock the car doors and call the police. He slammed his hand on the garage button to close it again, trying to trap the man inside or at least put a barrier between the stranger and his family. He ran to the neighbor's house, banging on the door and screaming for help. The police arrived within minutes, sirens wailing. They surrounded the house, weapons drawn, and managed to apprehend the man before the fire could spread to the main part of the home. The firefighters put out the blaze quickly, but the real horror came during the investigation after the smoke had cleared. The police went through the house to see how the man had gotten in. They found a trapdoor leading to the attic that had been tampered with. When they climbed up into the attic, they found a makeshift living space. It turned out that this man had been living in their attic for months. He had a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner between the insulation. There were stacks of empty food wrappers, the missing bread, the snacks, the empty milk cartons. He had been waiting up there in the dark, listening to the family below. Every time they left for work or school, he would climb down, eat their food, watch their television, and use their bathroom. That explained the glasses and plates. He had gotten comfortable. He had gotten sloppy. But the most chilling discovery was a notebook found near his sleeping bag. Inside, he had collected all of their personal information. He had their social security numbers, their bank account details, their passwords, and their schedules. The police told the family that based on the evidence, the man wasn't just planning to steal their identity. He was planning to kill them that night, burn the house down to destroy the evidence, and run off with their money and new identities. The only reason they survived was that they came home early and caught him in the act of setting the fire. The arguments about the unwashed dishes were the only warning signs they ever had. As if that story isn't frightening enough, there is another case that is perhaps even more disturbing because it involves the innocence of a child. This didn't happen in the same city, but the details are just as harrowing. It centers on a father and his young son. The father was a busy man trying to balance work and raising his child, and he loved his son dearly. However, like many parents, he had learned to filter out the wild imaginations of his child. Kids say crazy things all the time. They invent invisible friends. They see monsters in the closet, and they tell stories that make no sense. So when the son started talking about the clown, the father didn't take it seriously. It started one morning at the breakfast table. The little boy was pushing his cereal around with his spoon and looked tired. The father asked him if he slept okay. The boy looked up with big, serious eyes and said that he didn't sleep well because the clown was watching him. The father chuckled, thinking it was a remnant of a bad dream. He told his son that clowns belong in the circus and that there were no clowns in the house. He reassured him and sent him off to school. But the next morning, the boy said the same thing. He said the clown was standing in the corner of his room, just staring at him. This pattern continued for weeks. Every night, the father would go through a ritual to calm his son down. He would walk into the bedroom, check under the bed, open the closet door to show it was just clothes, and check behind the curtains. He would say with a smile that the coast was clear and that it was just a shadow or a bad dream. The boy would nod, but he still looked terrified. He insisted that the clown didn't do anything. He didn't speak or move much. He just stood there in the dark, watching him sleep. The father started to get a little frustrated. He thought his son was going through a phase or seeking attention. He told his son that he needed to be brave and stop making up stories because it was affecting his sleep. After a couple of weeks of this nightly drama, the complaints suddenly stopped. The father asked his son one morning if he had seen the clown. The boy shook his head and said no. The father was relieved. He thought his parenting had worked, that he had helped his son conquer his fear, or that the boy had simply grown bored of the imaginary game. Peace returned to the household. The father patted himself on the back for handling the situation well. He thought the nightmare was over. About a week after the boy stopped seeing the clown, the father was sitting in the living room after putting his son to bed. He turned on the evening news to catch up on the day's events. He was half listening while looking at his phone when a headline caught his attention. The news anchor was talking about a breaking story involving a serial intruder who had finally been arrested in a neighboring town. The father looked up at the screen and felt the blood drain from his face. The report detailed the arrest of a man who had been terrorizing families in the area. The police revealed that this man had a very specific and terrifying modus operandi. He was a drifter who would break into people's homes and live in their attics or crawl spaces for weeks at a time. But that wasn't the part that made the father's heart stop. The news anchor went on to say that the man had a twisted habit. At night, while the families were sleeping, he would come down from his hiding place. He would dress up in a vintage clown costume and stand in the bedrooms of the children, watching them silently for hours. The report showed a picture of the mask and the costume found in the man's possession. It was old, tattered, and horrifying. The police stated that the man would stay in one house for a few weeks until he felt he was close to being caught, and then he would move on to the next house. The timeline matched perfectly. The weeks that his son had been complaining were the exact time the man was active in their area, and the reason the boy had stopped seeing the clown wasn't because he had gotten over his fear. It was because the man had moved on to the next victim. The father sat there in silence, the glow of the television flickering in the dark room. He realized with a sick feeling in his gut that he had been tucking his son into bed every night, turning off the light and leaving him alone in a room with a real-life monster. All those times he had checked the closet and under the bed, the man had probably been just a few feet away, hiding in the attic access or behind a door, waiting for the father to leave so he could resume his watch. The father ran upstairs and hugged his sleeping son, vowing to never dismiss his fears again. Both of these stories share a common thread that taps into our deepest vulnerabilities. We assume that our homes are private. We assume that when we are in our pajamas, eating breakfast, or watching TV, we are unobserved. But the truth is, walls are just wood and plaster. Locks can be picked. And sometimes the noises we hear in the night, the creaking of a floorboard, the rustling in the attic, the object that isn't where we left it, aren't just the house settling. Sometimes it is someone else settling in. These families were lucky to survive with their lives, but they lost their sense of security forever. It makes you wonder as you sit there reading this, have you checked your attic lately? Are you sure that the noise you heard last night was just the wind? Because for the Miller family and the little boy with the clown, the monster wasn't under the bed. He was already in the house. Growing up, I was the last person you would expect to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. In fact, I was actively hostile toward the idea. My skepticism wasn't born out of a lack of exposure to the subject, but rather an overexposure to it. My mother was an alcoholic who also described herself as a psychic. Throughout my childhood, our house was filled with the smell of cheap wine and the constant chatter about spirits, energies, and messages from the other side. Because of her addiction, the lines between what she claimed to see and what was a product of her intoxicated state were always blurred. I learned to associate the supernatural with instability and chaos. Whenever she starts talking about spirits, I would roll my eyes so violently that I am surprised they didn't roll right out of my head. I became a creature of logic and hard facts, rejecting anything that couldn't be proven or touched. I wanted the world to make sense, unlike the unpredictable environment I lived in. This background is important because it highlights just how much it took to shake my worldview. I didn't want to believe in the paranormal. I was forced to. It all goes back to about 10 years ago. I was a teenager then, full of that specific kind of arrogance that only young men seem to possess. I had a close friend, and we spent most of our free time together. We fancied ourselves to be teenage philosophers. We will walk for hours having these long-winded, pretentious conversations about the state of society, politics, and how we were going to change the world. We thought we knew everything there was to know, but we didn't even notice when the world changed us. One of our favorite routes was a path through a specific park on the way back to his house. It was a shortcut, which made it practical when we had a curfew to meet, but it was also a beautiful route. It ran along the water, skirting the edge of a gorge. In the daylight, it was scenic and peaceful, a place where people jogged and walked their dogs. But at night, the atmosphere shifts entirely. To understand what happened to us, you really need to visualize the layout of this park. It wasn't a manicured city garden, it was a slice of wilderness that cut through the suburbs. The main trail was a long, paved path known as the Galloping Goose Trail, which is quite famous in our area. Branching off from this main trail was a smaller, curving path that circled a small inlet of water along the gorge. As you walked up the hill on this path, the streetlights that lined the main trail stopped suddenly. They cut off just before you entered the woods proper. However, there was one solitary light post further up the hill, standing like a lonely beacon or a lighthouse against the encroaching dark. Beyond that single light, the path continued into a dense wooded area, crested over a steep hill, and then wound its way back down. The geography of the place was deceptive. At one specific point on the path, if you looked through a break in the trees, you could see an old, broken-down house peering back at you. It sat there, rotting away, completely out of place. The strange thing about this park was the feeling of isolation. Even though you were never actually that far away from residential houses and convenience stores, the density of the trees and the sound of the water made it feel like you were miles away from civilization. When the sun went down, the park stopped being scenic and became foreboding. It was incredibly dark, the kind of darkness that feels heavy and suffocating. On this particular night, my friend and I were walking this route just as we had done 100 times before. We were deep in conversation, debating some topics that seemed incredibly important at the time but is now lost to remember. We were walking up the hill, approaching the transition from the lit path to the wooded area. As we got close, the last streetlight, that lonely beacon on the hill, flickered and died. It didn't just dim, it went completely black. At the time, I found it to be a bit odd, just a coincidence of bad timing and old infrastructure. It wasn't especially noteworthy, and it certainly didn't stop our conversation. We just kept walking, stepping out of the fading glow of the lower lights and into the absolute pitch black of the woods. We crested the hill and started walking down the other side. The air was cold, and the only sound was the crunch of our shoes on the gravel and the wind in the branches. Then the noise started. It didn't begin gradually, it didn't build up from a whisper. It was suddenly just there, and it was impossibly loud. It was a sound that had physical weight to it, a sound that vibrated in my chest and made my teeth ache. Now, I don't know about you, but when I am faced with something scary, my rational mind immediately goes into overdrive trying to explain it. I try to find a logical box to put the fear into so I can manage it. As this roar overtook us, my brain scrambled for an answer. I told myself it was a helicopter. That makes sense. It sounded like the beating of rotors, a rhythmic thumping that was merely flying dangerously low to the ground. I clung to that explanation for a few seconds, but as the source of the sound got closer, the clarity of the audio improved, and my heart sank into my stomach. The illusion of the helicopter shattered. The sound was all around us. It wasn't coming from above. It was surrounding us on all sides, a thunderous roar that engulfed the entire forest. I looked up instinctively, expecting to see the lights of a helicopter or a plane, but the trees were perfectly still. They were black silhouettes against the dark blue evening sky, motionless. There was no wind caused by rotors. There was no machine. Then the roar separated into distinct layers, It wasn't a single mechanical noise. It was organic. I heard voices. It wasn't just 10 voices or 20. It sounded like hundreds, maybe thousands of people. It was a chaotic, distorted cacophony consisting of speaking, whispering, and screaming all at once. It was a wall of human sound. I couldn't make out individual words or sentences, but I knew with absolute certainty what I was hearing. It was the sound of a crowd in panic, a mob of terror. It was the most awful thing I have ever heard in my life. The sheer volume of it was disorienting, making me feel dizzy and small. We froze. My friend and I just stood there in the darkness, paralyzed by this auditory assault. And then, just as strangely as it had begun, the sound began to fade. It didn't stop suddenly. It drifted away from us, moving through the trees like a physical wave, getting quieter and quieter until it was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. We looked at each other in the gloom. We didn't say a single word. We didn't need to. We both turned on our heels simultaneously and began to walk back the way we came. We weren't running, perhaps out of some foolish male pride, or perhaps because we were afraid that running would make it real. But there was an undeniable briskness to our pace. We walked with rigid determination, eyes fixed straight ahead, determined to look into the trees. When we finally got back to the main road, back to the safety of streetlights and cars and normal life, I completely lost my composure. I was shaken. I was furious and disenchanted all at once. The terror came from a very specific place: helplessness. I was a young man who thought he could handle anything, but this was something I couldn't fight. I couldn't punch a sound in the face. I couldn't argue logic with a ghost. I realized how foolish that sounds now. But in that moment, the feeling of total lack of control was horrible. I turned to my friend, needing validation. I asked him if he had heard it too. He didn't speak. He just nodded his head slowly, his face pale under the streetlights. In the days that followed, we tried to rationalize it. We figured we would be big, brave detectives and solve the mystery. We wanted to find a logical explanation that would make us feel better, so we could go back to being arrogant teenagers. We started looking into the history of the area. We went to the library and looked through old archives and newspapers. It turns out that our sleepy little town didn't have much history of excitement, except for one major tragedy. Years ago, there had been a massive bridge collapse. A trolley bridge that crossed the gorge had failed, plunging people into the water below. The details of the tragedy sent a chill down my spine. When the bridge collapsed, the bodies of the victims were carried by the present. They were dragged up onto the shores of the inlet, the very same shores that the path we were walking on circled around. The realization hits us like a physical blow. The voices we heard, that chaotic screaming and panic, sounded exactly like the echoes of a disaster. We had been walking through a graveyard of sorts, a place where a massive loss of life had washed ashore. We also looked into that creepy house I mentioned, the one that stood alone, peering through the trees, derelict and foreboding in a row of otherwise normal homes. We decided to go check it out during the day, thinking maybe the sound had come from squatters or a party there. When we got there, the feeling of dread I got from that place was overwhelming. It wasn't just a rundown house. It felt wrong. There was a massive amount of lumber sitting in the yard, piled up in messy stacks, just rotting away in the rain. It looked like someone had started a renovation project and then fled in the middle of it. We went back to the city archives to find out more about the property. Information on the house itself was surprisingly hard to come by. It took some digging, but we eventually found out why. The house hadn't always been there. It was originally built on the other side of town. The records show that there had been a serious fire at the original location. After the fire, for reasons that weren't entirely clear, the house was moved to its current location near the park. It was a house with a charred history, transplanted to a site of tragedy. I don't know if the house and the voices were connected, or if that entire area was just a magnet for bad energy, but I decided right then and there that I was done. I didn't know why these things were happening, but I knew I wanted no part of it. I stayed the hell out of that park afterwards. Well, mostly. Human memory is a funny thing. It has a way of dulling the sharp edges of fear over time. A few months passed, and the visceral terror of that night began to fade. I started to tell myself that maybe it hadn't been that bad. Maybe it was just the wind or a prank. I had a girlfriend at the time, and I wanted to impress her. I was telling her the story of the haunted park with all the gusto and enthusiasm of an uncle telling ghost stories around a campfire. I was trying to be the brave protector, the guy who had seen the unknown and lived to tell the tale. We were out for a walk, and without really thinking about it, I led us toward that same path. We started making the trek up the hill. It was night again, and the atmosphere was just as heavy as it had been months ago. As we walked, I felt a flutter of nervousness, but I shoved it down. I turned to her and, trying to be funny, I said something incredibly stupid. I told her, "Don't worry, we'll be okay so long as that light doesn't burn out." I pointed to the single lonely streetlight on the hill, the same one that had died the night I was with my friend. As if on cue, as if the universe was listening and waiting for me to challenge it, the light flickered and died. The timing was precise. It was immediate. The darkness slammed down on us instantly. My girlfriend didn't hesitate. She didn't try to rationalize it. She immediately started tugging at my arm, pulling me in the opposite direction. She declared with panic in her voice that we were leaving right now. I didn't argue with her, but I couldn't move for a second. I stood there slack-jawed, staring at the dead bulb. I feel like the punchline of a very dark joke, and then I started seeing things. I don't know if it was tricks of the light or my brain projecting my fear onto the environment, but the visual landscape changed. I looked down at the ground, and the shadows of the trees didn't look right. Shadows should be stationary if the object casting them is still, but these were not. The shadows of the trees seemed to be circling around us. They were elongating and twisting, moving with a fluid motion that defied the laws of physics. It felt like the woods were closing in, like a trap was snapping shut. I had never seen anything like that before, and I have never seen anything like it since. The skepticism that I had held on to for so long, the rolling of eyes at my mother's ghost stories, all of it evaporated. I finally understood that there are things in this world that logic cannot explain and that I cannot fight. I let my girlfriend pull me away, and we walked quickly back to the main road, leaving the darkness behind us. I learned my lesson that night. I never went back into that park after dark again. I drive past it sometimes, and I look at that patch of trees, and I know that whatever is in there is real, and it does not want visitors. Back in the 1920s, our town was a much smaller place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and news traveled faster than truth ever could. The butcher shop sat near the center of town and was one of those places people relied on every day. The butcher himself was a familiar face. He had worked there for years, knew his customers by name, and lived a quiet life, or at least that's what everyone believed. Then one day in 1924, he vanished. No warning, no goodbye, no sign of where he had gone. One day he was there, opening the shop like always, and the next day he was simply gone. At first, people assumed something bad must have happened. Men didn't just disappear back then, especially not someone with a steady business and a family. The police asked questions, neighbors whispered, and rumors spread quickly. Some thought he had been robbed and killed. Others believed he had fallen into trouble and someone had made him disappear. His wife was left behind, and her behavior quickly became the focus of attention. Instead of mourning for years like people expected, she remarried not long after. The man she married was someone many in town already suspected she had been seeing before her husband vanished. That alone was enough to make people uneasy. When this new man stepped into the butcher shop and took over the business, suspicion grew even stronger. To many townspeople, it looked like the perfect crime. A husband disappears, the wife marries her lover, and the lover benefits by taking over the butcher shop. For years, people whispered that the butcher must have been murdered. Some believed his wife and her new husband had planned it together. Others thought the new husband had done the deed on his own. There was no proof, no body, and no confession, but that didn't stop the town from making up its mind. Stories grew darker as they were passed from person to person. Some claimed the butcher had been killed in the back of the shop. Others said his body had been dumped somewhere far away. Over time, the story became part of the town's identity. Then, in 1927, something else happened that only deepened the mystery. The wife went missing too. One moment she was there, and the next she was gone. This time, the rumors exploded. Now people were certain murder had taken place. Some thought the new husband had killed her to keep her quiet. Others believed the past had finally caught up with her. The town was convinced it was dealing with a chain of murders, even if no one could prove it. As the years passed, the story became local legend. Children grew up hearing it. Teenagers dared each other to talk about it late at night. Adults repeated the story like it was fact. The butcher, his wife, and the mystery surrounding them became frozen in time. People stopped asking new questions because everyone thought they already knew the answers. The case went cold, not because it was solved, but because there was nothing more anyone thought could be done. Decades went by. Generations passed. The butcher shop stayed open, passed down through shared ownership. The man who inherited it after everything happened kept it running. And then his family did the same. By the time many people were alive to remember it, the story felt ancient, almost like a ghost tale tied to the town itself. Then, in 1993, everything changed in a way no one expected. A kid at the local school was assigned an editorial project. Instead of choosing something simple, he became interested in the town's old mystery. He started digging through records, newspaper clippings, death certificates, and missing persons reports. What began as curiosity slowly turned into something bigger. The pieces didn't fit the story everyone had believed for so long. The kid noticed small details that others had ignored or forgotten. He found records suggesting the butcher had been unhappy long before he disappeared. There were hints of an affair on his side, something no one had talked about. When he looked deeper, he found evidence that the butcher hadn't been murdered at all. Instead, he had run away to be with his own lover. He had left town quietly, choosing to disappear rather than face scandal or confrontation. Then came the truth about the wife. Her disappearance in 1927 had been surrounded by rumors of violence, but the facts told a different story. She hadn't been killed. She had been in a car with friends when it went off a cliff. The accident had happened in a remote area, and for reasons lost to time, her body was never immediately identified or connected back to the missing person case. It wasn't a murder. It was a tragic accident. Both bodies, the butcher's and the wife's, were eventually found decades later, long after the truth could have changed anything for them. Their remains were identified, and the timeline finally made sense. No one had killed anyone. There had been no grand conspiracy, no violent plot carried out in secret, just two people who made choices that led them away from their old lives in very different ways. When the kid published his findings in the local newspaper, the town was stunned. People didn't know how to react at first. For generations, they had believed they were living with the aftermath of a double murder. Now they were being told that no murders had happened at all. It felt strange, almost disappointing to some and embarrassing to others. The story everyone had sworn was true turned out to be built on assumptions and rumors. There was something sad about it. Lives had been judged, reputations destroyed, and fear passed down for decades over something that never happened. There was also something scary about how easily a town could convince itself of a lie and hold on to it for so long. At the same time, there was a dark humor to the truth. After all those years of whispered accusations and dramatic stories, the reality was almost boring in comparison. The butcher shop is still there today. The man who inherited it kept it alive, and now his great-great-grandson runs it. People still shop there, still talk about the past, and still shake their heads at how wrong everyone was. The story hasn't disappeared, but it has changed. It's no longer about murder. It's about misunderstanding, human weakness, and how stories grow when the truth is missing. Looking back, it's hard not to feel conflicted. The whole thing is tragic in its own way. A man ran away from his life. A woman died in an accident. A town spent decades believing something that wasn't true. And yet, there's something strangely fascinating about it all. It shows how history isn't always what we think it is, and how sometimes the truth is hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone curious enough to connect the dots.